Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the opening bell with Alex and Mac. We hope that you've had a fantastic week and you're gearing up for another boxing weekend where there's plenty going on, plenty to talk about. We're going to include Diego Corrales from This Week in History on the pod as well. How's your week been, Matt?
It's been good, apart from, as I just told you about before we started recording, the garage door snapping. It's a really old garage door. I presume that it's been there since the house was built, which I believe was in the 1960s. And the cable snapped. Garage door was hanging off for a while, managed to get it back on again. Then I had to get something out of the garage, got the garage door balancing on my head while I'm trying to reach for something in the garage. Other than that, mate, it's been a good one. About you?
A little bit of gardening. Weather's turned, a little bit of gardening. Yeah, not bad, but just soul destroying, back breaking. It really is. So last season, I've got a farmer's field on one side and then a wood, that kind of thick tree wood behind at the back of the garden on the other side. And there's just all these dock leaves last year seeded through the fence. I'm talking about tens of thousands of these dock leaves seeded into one of my flower beds, going right parallel up alongside the farmer's field. So, yeah, there are all sorts of legal. I was speaking to the farmer, and I was speaking to one of the farmhands, and there's just all these sort of rules and regs that they've got to follow about when they can spray, they can spray. Because I just love them to spray all the way up the side of my fence so that I'm not got docks. And anyway, so I've been trying to weed these tens of thousands of thick-rooted dock leaves, and it's breaking my heart as well as my back. It's absolutely breaking. It's breaking me in every way. So yeah, but I've just been digging into that. So hours and hours and hours. I've got a good chunk of it done over the last week or so. So we're getting there. Got to show the fighter's mentality, haven't you, with these things? Fighter's mentality.
You can't let dock leaves get in your head. You just can't. Got to beat them.
Thing is, dock leaves got wicked body shots, and they can do 15 rounds, no bother at all, in a canter. Oh, yeah. In fact, if I was to hazard a guess, I'd say dock leaves are absolutely on PEDs. If I was to hazard a guess, I'd say they are. Right, let's talk about the news lines. We're going to tie two together. There's a few news lines from last week that I was going to get into. Jai Opetaia's sort of ongoing legals with the IBF was one of them on the back of his unsanctioned fight, which was for the Zuffa belt, but not for the IBF title. They have actually subsequently stripped him as well, which you thought they had done last week or the week before, but actually that now has been confirmed. Are they following their own protocols? And what about maybe one or two of the red herrings that may have been reported as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was all Boxing Scene reported it kind of late last night, which is Monday night UK time. That it had all been confirmed to us that he had been stripped. We thought that was going to be the case a few weeks ago, but I was premature. I think it was 2 weeks ago when I said that he had been stripped. He hadn't. It was still kind of under deliberation at that point, but the board of directors at the IBF have subsequently had a hearing and they've released information, and they've just said that they were in two minds about sanctioning it. The only time I think where they said, yes, okay, we'll sanction it is when they were told that the Zuffa belt would essentially be a trophy as opposed to a championship. And then when they found out that the Zuffa were going to kind of declare it as a championship, this is all in the days leading up to the fight, they opted not to sanction it, yet they still receive sanctioning fees from Team Opetaia in the days leading up to the fight that they swiftly refunded. And they have now essentially decided to strip Jai Opetaia for going ahead with an unsanctioned fight with a sanctioning body, with a title on the line that they simply do not recognise as being legitimate. Had it been a unification, and I hate that word, as everybody knows, with a more recognised sanctioning body, they would have allowed it to go ahead. But as they say at the end of their statement that was given to us last night is, as noted in an earlier press release regarding this situation, the IBF's rules don't always yield the preferred or popular outcome, but they provide structure and transparency, serving not just the champion, but those waiting for the opportunity to fight for the title. And I think ultimately they have. Yet again, the IBF are kind of playing by their own rules. And, we've seen it an awful lot, haven't we, in recent weeks and months with fighters coming out and complaining about certain things that the sanctioning bodies are doing. The more common one was sanctioning body fees. But these are all things that the fighters know about and they're told about beforehand. The fees are not hidden. And even though I don't agree with the size of the fee, nor do I agree with something ridiculous like if you fight for a different sanctioning body title in a different weight class, then you still have to pay the sanctioning body that you hold a title with a fee. I don't agree with that. I think it's insane. I think it's borderline corrupt, but it's all there in black and white. So to then go through with a fight, to parade your own championship, or to parade the new belt and then afterwards have an issue with paying a sanctioning fee and start ranting and raving that it's not fair, I don't think is the right way to go about it, in all honesty. And I'm not saying this in defence of the sanctioning body titles. I think anybody that listens to this has read what I've written over the years, knows that I think, and I'm certain that the sport will be better off with one sanctioning body, maximum two, or something better coming along to completely clean the landscape up. I genuinely believe that all of these titles that we're constantly having to talk about, constantly having to sift through, is a massive reason, if not the biggest reason, why the sport of boxing is regarded as a niche sport to many, many people in the outside world, because they no longer follow it. And you only have to look at the last couple of weeks as a cases in point. There's been numerous titles fought for, numerous titles won, and they do not get a single mention in the outside world. Yet we're constantly hearing about the Indoor Athletics World Championships. The reason why we don't hear about boxing anymore is because the titles have lost all meaning to the public at large. So I'm completely behind anybody that is anti-sanctioning bodies. However, they all have their rules, and ultimately people that are complaining after the event, I think just, don't fight for these titles in the first place then. Don't give them that platform in the first place, is my thinking on it. But yeah, in short, after that unexpected rant, yes, the IBF have just enforced their own rules, very, very simply.
Well, yeah, and modern day fighters are obsessed with the idea of undisputed, aren't they? And that only sort of enhances the quest or the idea. Let's say within the current structure, though, who is going to profit most? And I'm talking about fighters. Which fighters are going to profit from Opetaia's situation? Because in the February rankings, 1 and 2 weren't rated. And actually, it was Chris Billam-Smith who was number 3. Masternak's just in behind Vidal Riley, I think, top 6 or top 7, or was. They've got fights just around the corner. So the question is, Opetaia stripped, who is going to capitalize on that in the current system?
I'm not quite sure what the rules are with the IBF. I suspect that that it won't just be, if 1 and 2 is currently vacant, that means they hadn't ascertained who their leading contenders were, that nobody had an eliminator or had proved themselves to be the mandatory contender by achievement in the ring. Therefore, there would have to have been a series of fights to ascertain those numbers 1 and 2. So I would suspect there'd be 1 or 2 fights ordered in order to get that title, to get that to clarify the situation of that title in terms of awarding it to a champion. But yeah, I mean, if Chris Billam-Smith wants to go the IBF route, I think he could probably map out. He's in a really, really good position to challenge for that.
We mentioned last week about an amazing milestone for Jordan Granham at middleweight, having his 200th fight. And it was a fight that was teed up for him to have a chance of winning. And actually he did that, Matt. So celebrating the milestone, quite a milestone to get to, a couple of 100 fights. He's actually got more fights just coming up around the corner as well. But what an incredible run that's been.
It's just unthinkable, really. 200 fights. We've seen a few fighters do it in recent years, and they've got that tag as journeymen. And we know what they do for the sport. We know that sometimes we find those fights involving journeymen not quite the most exciting on the bill, because it's almost like they're pre-scripted beforehand as to who's going to win. But Jordan Granham, tremendous service to the sport. That they are essential, as much as some of us find those fights particularly annoying. But they are essential to the education of so many up-and-coming fighters. Jordan Granham, 200 fights. Yeah. What can you say? It's beyond my comprehension, that many fights.
I mentioned last week about Tommy Hearns and a sort of ongoing guardianship battle. You may have seen sort of clips about this or little news lines filtering through, particularly on X and Twitter, regarding this sort of story. It's been sort of in and out of the news. They're certainly covering it closer to home over there, particularly in the local news, both press and in TV. And that's going to develop. It seems like his son Ronald is maybe in a better position now to look after, take care of his dad. But that is something that's been a little troubling to hear. There were concerns for Tommy Hearns himself, for his welfare, his well-being, where he was about a month or so ago. But it seems like that's quietening down. But it is an ongoing story, man. It
is when you think back to the Thomas Hearns of the 1980s and 1990s and what a force of nature he was, and now he finds himself in this position. I think the good news to come out of it is that Ronald Hearns, his son, is essentially out there trying to do everything he can for him. We did hear reports probably 2 months ago about Thomas Hearns facing kind of homelessness and things like that, and we were told that simply just wasn't true. But the reports keep coming, and Thomas Hearns, it's no secret that mentally he's not quite the man he was, but he's not a psychological wreck either. But he's, this unfortunately is a story that is quite common, isn't it, with great fighters of the past. It's something that we speak about when we talk about Ringside Charitable Trust so frequently. And it's something that we allude to when we watch fighters of today going through hard fight after hard fight. We're not being spoil sports here. We've just got one eye on the future for them, with many lessons from the past with which to view that future. And I think Thomas Hearns, unfortunately, is another lesson for fighters that are perhaps going on too long in the sport.
Well, with that in mind, we'll tie together this week in history and another one of the news lines, actually, because the stoppage to Diego Corrales against Derrick Gainer is one of those that caused a bit of a stir at the time. And there's a really interesting line from Jim Lampley in commentary there, talking about the Las Vegas view, philosophy, and maybe Jay Nady as the referee on that night for that commission. Safety first approach in Las Vegas is the line from Jim Lampley in that. Interesting. So we'll come back to that a bit later on. But more recently, of course, we lost the great Ricky Hatton. And there has been a report come out this week, Matt, from the sort of coroner stroke autopsy, and the suggestion that Hatton did have mild CTE, quote unquote. I don't know how significantly we have to take that particular quote, that particular storyline, but many people, and obviously those of us who follow the sport and say have read Tris Dixon's book Damage, for example, will be piqued in quite a significant way regarding that particular quote and that particular storyline.
I think the whole report it makes for really grim reading. In all honesty, I think the ruling was that the coroner could not be satisfied that Ricky Hatton's death was suicide, even though it was caused by hanging. But from all the testimonies that they got, was that he was in a really good place. His friends and his family said he was in a really good place. People saw him on the Friday night. He's making plans for the future. But they did all agree that now and again he would suffer from memory loss, from confusion, and yeah, it's the onset of CTE, which is essentially caused by too many blows to the head. So we still don't know what happened what was going through his mind in the last few hours of his life. But his bags were packed to go to Dubai. And you can now completely understand why people like Paul Speak, his longtime manager and friend, were just so upset and so confused by Ricky's death. And I think it should, again, although there is kind of that mystery to what happened at the end, I do think the headline here and the warning signs here are that even Ricky Hatton took too many blows. And you look back on his career and you kind of think, yeah, he did. He had a really grueling career. Even on the way up, there was lots of 12-rounders. There was lots of bloodshed. There was the horror knockout he suffered at the hands of Manny Pacquiao. There was the kind of sustained pummeling at the hands of Floyd Mayweather. And yeah, it just shows you. I didn't see too many kind of boxing outlets running with this or mentioning this or it being on any boxing broadcasts or anything like that, because we're not allowed to talk about it really, are we? But I think the sooner that we do, the sooner that we get the message out there, I think that everybody will feel better about the sport and be more educated about the sport. We can't keep pushing these things under the carpet and pretending they don't exist, because they do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we've spoken about it before. It's not, you can understand why mainstream media might have a big issue with one of the poster boys of British boxing, perhaps suffering for the sport that he starred in and led. Those dots joined are uncomfortable. But the way to approach it and what it can do is to show the next generation and the one after that, that if even someone like that can be harmed by the sport, what can we do to make it a bit safer? What can we put in place to make their chances of profiting from the sport, from enjoying the sport, as safe and successful as we possibly can? And that's the approach, that's the philosophy, that's where we all have to get to. And that was the entire point, and one of the big points about Tris Dixon's book. And there's another book actually with that in mind I'm going to read, the Stop the Fight Ref, which looks quite interesting in that regard as well. So I've kind of got that on my reading list, and I'm sure a few of our listeners will want to look into that as well. Better news for Gilal Yafai. He's got a fight coming up, TBC, but against Richie Sandoval for 2 of the flyweight world titles. Little guy I've seen ringside, actually, Sandoval. I commentated on him fighting and beating Jay Harris. Seems like years and years and years and years ago, and he kind of blew me away that night. He's looked beatable since, and a bit rough around the edges as he's gone up to world class, but he's still a good operator. And that's a great opportunity for Gilal whenever and wherever that comes, Matt.
Yeah, it is. It's what he deserves. I mean, it's criminal what he went through regarding losing his title and the aftermath of that. So he most certainly deserves another chance. As you say, I remember you ranting and raving about Sandoval after that particular performance. But he's a quality fighter. It's a difficult ask for Gilal, and I just hope that there isn't any lasting effect from what happened to him in his last title fight. I really do, and that for me would be the concern. I think if you'd have made Gilal Yafai versus Sandoval 18 months ago, I'd have been picking Yafai to do the business. Now I'm not so sure.
Let's talk about the fights from the weekend and what's coming up this weekend. Adamas beating Amma Williams. In the end, very convincingly. George Liddard probably learning plenty against Tyler Denny. And in the end, getting the successful defence of his British and Commonwealth middleweight titles done and dusted. Good interview afterwards, actually, with Liddard there. He's an engaging young man, isn't he, with a good following and a good story and good prospects. Not so much for Michael Conlan, who retired immediately after losing to Kevin Walsh. And it was a bit of a stinker, wasn't it, in terms of a fight. And I suspect Conlan and those closest to him, particularly the promoters, certainly the fans, they probably feel a bit hard done by Matt there, that his career ends on that bum rum note and in that kind of fashion, because he might have been a bit unlucky to get edged in that, as difficult a fight as it was to both score and watch.
It was a difficult fight to score, and I think for those that thought Conlan nicked it, I'd have no argument with that outcome. But I think whether he did or not, I think Conlan learned everything that he needed to learn about himself during those 10 rounds. And I think it was probably quite revealing, the choice of the opponent, because although Walsh kind of gave it his all and was unbeaten, he hadn't fought anybody approaching world class beforehand, and Conlan is hoping to win that and then get a title shot. And the fact that he couldn't win that said it all. And I've got nothing but admiration for Conlan, for the way, from the amateur exploits and the excitement and the disgust at the Olympics, and the way that he kind of made a name for himself by sticking his finger up to the judges there back in 2016. And we all thought he was going to win a championship. And he is now in a really tough position. The fact that he came out and said, I said to everybody, if I couldn't beat this guy, I'm retiring, and I now announce my retirement. So he's announced his retirement. He doesn't, and Elliot Wurzel wrote a typically thoughtful piece for Boxing Scene yesterday, where saying essentially it could have been so much worse. It could have been one of those harrowing knockout losses, but it wasn't. He goes out on a kind of limps out in a 10-rounder in a fight that many people thought he might have deserved just to nick. But ultimately, it taught him everything he needs to know without having a punishing, horrible loss to kind of digest as well. But Michael Conlan, heck of a career, didn't reach the heights that he wanted to reach, and he himself will have to cope with that in the coming months and years. But he's got a good head on his shoulders, Michael Conlan, and one is optimistic about his future.
And hopefully, because of the platform that he started out on, let's not forget, he signed, you'd think for decent money, at least top rank. I mean, he got ring walked by Conor McGregor, for goodness sake, on his debut in America. And then he's had big shows in Ireland. He's fought for world titles several times since as well. So you'd like to think, still plenty of people turned out at the weekend. You'd like to think that he's made a few quid at least. I think financially, not necessarily in terms of his own ambitions, but I think financially, he couldn't have masterminded much of a better career, Matt. I think financially, in terms of maximizing his output and potential, I don't think he could have done any better than he has done. Could his team have done a better job in this particular instance? I'm talking management, promoters, matchmakers in this instance, or were they in a really difficult position that to get the world title fight, you need to get a certain type of fighter in to keep you in the kind of rankings position so that you can win that, then get the next slot? Were they kind of tied bound by a very certain set of circumstances?
I think it's as I don't want to say something as harsh as they must have been aware, or people must have been aware, that there's a danger that Conlan loses if he goes in too tough at this stage of his career. But you're right. I do think there was a world ranking. I think was he ninth in the WBC rankings going into the fight. Victory over Walsh wouldn't necessarily have seen him fly up the ratings, but he could have been having those discussions with the WBC about kind of trying to secure a title shot, and I think that was what they were hoping to do. What else could they have done? I was there when he made his comeback in Brighton on the undercard of a Harlem Eubank fight, and Conlan to me looked like he was on borrowed time. Then he then surprised me in his next outing. To be honest, really surprised me in his next outing. But it's difficult when fighters reach this point of their career and they're still chasing that elusive world title. I think when you say he couldn't have done anything more. I think all he was lacking really was that title win, because when you got that title win, your first defence, you're going to get paid a lot more than you would than when you're challenging for the title. So I think he probably missed out on a little windfall in that way. But he did, as a consequence of his talent and his personality, his charisma, he did sign some really, really good deals along the way. And I hope that he is financially secure.
I think performance of the weekend was probably Carlos Adames beating Amo Williams, wasn't it? I mean, Amo Williams tried as best he could, and you can just see maybe lack of real sort of notable punching power, but also it's relative defensive frailties as well. Not enough head movement. He's always there, kind of in the zone to be hit. But Adames is sneaky good, Adames, isn't he? He doesn't do anything in particular that you go, wow. But he's just very consistent and very persistent with a fairly high level of quality. Lots of amateur background, of course, to fall back on as well. And tactically, he was absolutely bang on, shooting that fast right hand, either lead or counter, repeatedly. He's sneaky, isn't he? Really sneaky, Adames. I reckon there's loads of fighters around, Denzel Bentley's of this world, for example, who look at him and think, God, he's just a world titleist waiting to lose. I bet you there's loads of people think that. And I bet you when they get in there, they rethink pretty quickly.
This is the thing, isn't it? We said it last week that we were kind of, didn't we say we were looking at the odds on a Amo Williams points decision?
Yeah.
Amo Williams, up to a certain level, has looked really good. And you just wondered if he would have it just enough to kind of out-slick and out-maneuver Carlos Adames. But no, he didn't. He got dropped early. Williams, he gave it such a good go, but I think he's, again, without wanting to be disrespectful, I think it's almost like he's found his level. He reminded me of middleweights from the 90s that would kind of stick around in and around the top 15 for years, but whenever they had to step up, almost like a gatekeeper type, that they would be found wanting at a certain level. And it does seem to be the case with Williams. But if you look at Williams, even in that last round when he's still taking his licks, his already unkempt hair is just getting increasingly ragged. His face is swelling, yet he's gulping back air and he's just still pushing forward. He gave it everything, Amo Williams. But Adames was almost like one step ahead throughout. I think that early knockdown was telling as well. And yeah, Adames is going to be really, really tricky to beat. And as you say, he's one of those fighters that I'm sure other people in and around him look at him and think, yep, I know exactly what to do in there. And then they get in the ring and Adames surprises them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's getting on in years, of course. George Liddard is just starting out in his early 20s. He's already a British champion. And you look at, he's gone in, hasn't he? Last few fights, he's stepping up quite quickly as well. I mean, I saw him on a top tier show last year or the year before, and he was really rough around the edges. And I must admit, I thought when he stepped up against Kieran Conway, I thought that was a big jump up on what I'd seen from ringside with George Liddard. He looked a different fighter. He was one of those guys against Conway who just completely rose to the occasion and fought to the opponent. And he just took his game to another level. And he was, I suppose, with Tyler Denny's previous experience, it was another potential jump up, even although maybe Denny isn't quite at that level anymore. But he still showed lots of the old pro tricks and lots of the experience to be competitive in just about every round and to win plenty, I think, until around halfway or just beyond halfway, Denny. So 2 good step-up fights for Liddard, and he is getting better and better, even although there were times at the weekend where he had to huff and puff a bit, Matt.
He did, and he'll be a better fighter for it. Full credit to Tyler Denny as well. Did Rowley Regis proud. You thought in the first couple of rounds that he was going to suffer a similar fate that he did against Hamza Shiraz the last time he had a fight kind of this magnitude. But he kind of bit down on his gum shield and came roaring back. And really, every now and if Liddard gave him an opportunity, Tyler Denny would take it. He was banging through the middle and almost telling George Liddard, you're not at that level yet, son. You're not going to walk through me. And I thought Denny was as good as he possibly could be. He kind of exceeded my expectations because after 2 rounds, I thought it would be over in 3 or 4. And I think I've seen some things online where you look at the Hamza Shiraz result where he blows Tyler Denny away. Then you look at this and Liddard kind of goes, it's a close-ish, albeit unanimous decision, 8 rounds to 4. And people starting to be a little bit critical of George Liddard. And I just think that's really, really unfair. What it was a superb fight at British title level where they were both fighting with genuine desperation to win that, to either keep the British title or win that British title. And we've seen those kind of fights time and time again. And going back to what I said about I think the British title has suffered as well as a consequence of all of these world titles are out there that are out there. Because why are we not hearing about that fight the next morning? Why are people not talking about that? Why is that not just taking up a little 10-second clip at the end of the news in the sports bulletins? It's not. And I know that it's not the be all and end all anymore to be on kind of linear television or to be on terrestrial news. I know it's not, but it's always a good indication of what people in the public are interested in seeing and what is deemed as worthwhile. And fights like this, it's been years and years and years since the British title has come anywhere near the news pages or the news on television.
Interesting point. And the question for Liddard and his team, I think, in the next couple of weeks is how much of that... I mean, he was dynamite for the first 3 rounds, wasn't he? First 2 in particular. Yeah. Absolute mustard. And it was what we saw against Conway. And you thought, he's going to get Denny out of there in 3 rounds. I thought, wow. And that it would have been a hell of a statement. But it was still a hell of a performance in those early rounds. So the big question is now for them... Why wasn't he able to sustain that? Because there's no doubt he slightly changed his tack because his real skill in those 3 rounds and in the Conway fight was that mastery on the edge of range and that control on the edge of range where he either gets you to commit counters or he's off first and gets you in basically a shootout. And he's been brilliant in that little area. Now, how much of the fact that he wasn't anymore was his own fault for not sticking to the game plan, sticking to the tack, how much of it was because Denny changed the nature of the play, because it became more physical, it became more of an inside fight, and it became more competitive because of that. So I'd be fascinated to know which of those, how much of both were at play, Matt.
Yeah, and it would be, and it might just be a very simple case of Liddard had success in the first round, real success in the second, was on top in the third, and was at the back of his mind thinking, right, keep doing this, I'm going to win in the 4th round or whatever. And essentially, he just got tired for a little while. He didn't look like he was gulping back air or he'd emptied his reserves at any point, but there's a chance that he simply got tired. And he just realised that after Denny had stood up to what he was standing up to, that, hang on a minute, I've got to be a little bit clever here, because what if I don't get him out of there and I'm going at full throttle? But plenty of lessons to be learned for George Liddard. And in the end, an impressive victory. I think if you just forget what happened what happened to Denny against Hamza Shiraz, that doesn't matter. Denny came with real ambition. He's got that kind of underdog mentality where he was thriving in the build-up because everybody is writing him off. Nobody fancied him to win that fight. And I think if people are being honest, not many would have fancied him to go the distance. And that's purely as a consequence of what happened against Hamza Shiraz. They ignored everything that he'd done before that. And yeah, full credit to both of them, because it was a terrific British title fight.
And I liked the tone from Eddie Hearn afterwards. They're aware that Adames is a world champion. They're also aware that's where they're going or they're heading for, but they're also very much pertinently aware that that is some way on the horizon. And Eddie saying afterwards he'd like Liddard to defend the British and Commonwealth titles, get hold of a Lonsdale belt. And I think that's really sensible, sound boxing advice as well as business advice. And that would be a good look. They're stocked, Matchroom, actually, aren't they, in this division? They had Lely Buttigieg and Jimmy Sains on the same card this weekend. By the way, he's a Scottish guy, 9-0, and Aston Brown, who's milling around as well. He's a prospect who's maybe sort of just around the corner. And this weekend, Shaquille Thompson goes in against former British champion Brad Pauls. That's a really interesting fight. He's a talented Sheffield fighter who's unbeaten in 15. He's won 5 on the bounce. That's on the Manchester undercard, Itauma against Franklin. So Shaquille Thompson Pauls. That's a big fight for Shaquille Thompson. That's a statement of intent taking on a guy like Brad Pauls. And Nathan Heaney is in a go-forward fight on that card as well, Matt. So all those names. I mean, Matchroom will probably try and keep the sort of Buttigiegs and Sains of this world short, but Heaney, Pauls, Shaquille Thompson in that matchup this weekend, they're all names to consider going forward, possibly, unless they're going down that fringe sanctioning body title route, which seems to be de rigueur.
Well, yeah, well said. I would hope that they don't do that. And I think with someone like Liddard, who seems to have a big following, so they've got someone where they can see talent, they can see nurturable talent, that they can see that he's far from the finished article. Throw in the fact that he sells tickets as well, and I would think that they will do the sensible thing rather than trying to fast track him up the rankings to a title shot that, if he takes place in the next 18 months, he's not going to win it. Whereas build the brand, build the talent, build the confidence, get him the experience that he needs, Lonsdale belt on his fireplace, and then we see what happens from there. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think George Liddard is going to go on and win a world championship, but he could certainly have a really good career. And I think even if you look at what Matchroom did recently with Johnny Fisher, and they got a little bit overexcited, I think, with Johnny Fisher. And I suspect that they might be asking themselves some questions about whether they did the right thing with matching him with Dave Allen and then agreeing to a rematch with Dave Allen. And all of a sudden, kind of the hottest ticket seller on their books is kind of struggling for a way forward in his career, probably because he was moved forward too soon.
Yeah, I'd have thought they keep Heaney away from Liddard, and I'll be intrigued to see what the winner of Shaquille Thompson versus Brad Pauls is going to do going forward. I don't sense, even although I've mentioned all those names, I don't sense we're going to get a Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, Queensberry Matchroom matchup anytime soon with some of those potential names. I don't think so. And particularly with Heaney, they'll be looking with Heaney to try and somehow manufacture some sort of big event for him, won't they? I mean, he wants Stoke City football ground, doesn't he, in a big one? And I suspect they'll try and carve out something like that for Heaney. So they're going to step quietly and softly with him and then try and get him to a big one. But those are the names that are going to be in action this weekend. Of course, we go to Manchester on Saturday for Itauma against Franklin. Really looking forward to this one. Really looking forward to it. I mean, just about everything is at play here, isn't it, Matt? You could see Franklin fights in the pocket, fairly good defences, but there, right in front of you, he's not a mover. You can see Itauma doing an absolute number on him. Is Franklin enough of a kind of Kevin Johnson to go into the shell, to defend, to look after himself, that he's the guy to take Itauma rounds? How are you feeling about this one?
It's the perfect fight, I think, for Itauma at this point of his career. I don't think it's any secret, though, that already eyes are firmly fixed on what comes next, but this may be the penultimate stop before he goes into what I would classify as kind of elimination level fights. The WBC ordered in December for Itauma to face Lawrence Okoli in a final WBC eliminator. Before that, the WBA put Itauma forward as the leading contender for their regular title. And Murat Gassiev this week, who holds that regular title, has made some comments about Itauma. And when people like Gassiev are kind of, as a journalist, you will get things from certain people saying, "Oh, do you want to interview this guy? Do you want to interview this guy? Do you want to interview this guy?" And one of the names on there all of a sudden is Gassiev. And that's clearly because Itauma has a fight. And Gassiev is then being told to say something about Itauma to build a potential fight in the future. But what he said, Gassiev, is true. He says he hasn't completed 10 rounds yet. He hasn't been in a fight that's scheduled for 12. He looks good, but who knows? Let's calm down. Let's calm down until he's proven it at world level. And I completely agree with that. Itauma has been in the consciousness of people, of boxing insiders for many years, long before he turned professional. I think I've said it before. I remember an amateur coach phoning me up and saying, "My gosh, my guy's just been in with Moses Itauma, this young teenage kid," and Itauma took him apart in sparring. And Itauma was still about 18 months from turning professional at that point. So we've been aware of him. We've been aware of the promise. We know when he turned professional, there's all this fanfare that he's going to break Mike Tyson's record and be the youngest heavyweight title holder in history. It hasn't quite worked out like that, but I still think he's been managed really well. I thought the one-round victory over Dillian Whyte was incredible. That was when everybody kind of stopped and went, wow, he is the real deal here. But we still don't know that. And I think in that regard, Franklin is an excellent opponent because he is slippery, he is skilled, he can go rounds. He's been the full distance with Whyte, he's been the full distance with Joshua. But again, people are like, well, what comes next? So then you can argue is if we're already certain that Itauma wins, the only question mark is, does he blaze him away? Does he do it in the middle rounds or does he go the distance? You then say, well, what's the point? The point is that Itauma needs rounds. And I think Franklin might give him at least 3 or 4. He might give him all 10, to be honest. He might well do. And I think Itauma needs that. I think there is a lot of hype, some of it justified, but in the same way that fighters, you mentioned Kevin Johnson. Kevin Johnson was the like a yardstick for the likes of Anthony Joshua on the way up, and numerous other fighters. Daniel Dubois as well had to go with Kevin Johnson. But you go back even further to the Mike Tyson that we just mentioned, and you look at fighters that were put in front of Mike Tyson, like Jesse Ferguson, like Mitch Green, like James Tillis. They were put in there to see how Tyson coped with a savvy operator, and that's exactly the case here.
I suppose the question fans are asking is, I mean, what happens when Itauma gets hit? Because the truth is that's what everyone's wondering. And, you know, Franklin can do that. He can catch and counter. You said slippery. That's in the pocket. So the question is how much, you know, Itauma's quite explosive, isn't he, when he closes the distance. But we've seen in the last few fights that he's not reckless with that. He's not dangerous with that. So the question is, can Franklin get shots off, find space, angles that are going to be able to land the punches to ask the question that everyone's wondering about with regard to Itauma?
Possibly. We don't know, do we? I mean, it's a cliche, but one punch can change everything in heavyweight boxing. So maybe even Franklin has got that in his locker. I think you might see what we did see with Franklin against Joshua was, I'm not going to say he went into a shell and was just happy to last the distance, but he was quite respectful of Joshua, gave it more of a go against Dillian Whyte. How ambitious he will be, how much he really believes in himself, I don't know. Itauma has got a reputation worldwide now as the kind of the champion in waiting. He's going to be the next one. Usyk is going to retire, and then Itauma's going to take over the division. So how much of that will be playing on Franklin's mind? I suspect he does come over thinking he's going to do the job, and I suspect he himself will have learned plenty from those fights with Whyte and Joshua. But no, I suppose in answer to your question, I can't see Franklin being the one that gives us the answers about Itauma's whiskers.
The only way he's able to do it, he's got to be able to he's got to be able to catch and counter in the pocket, because that's where he fights. He's a sitting duck, Franklin, the way he fights. It's absolute sitting duck. And the way that Itauma fights, probably the fastest hands we've seen in that division for a while. But he moves up and down, doesn't he? And he'll punch head and body, and he'll change the attack. And with Franklin right in front of him, I mean, he's just a sitting duck, absolute sitting duck. So I'm going to be interested to see when those attacks come, can Franklin be composed and defend and then pick his moments? Because that is the only way he's got a chance. So we'll see. We'll see. What about the other fights there? Liam Davies fighting for the vacant European title against a guy, Francesco Grandelli, the Italian who lost to Laurenti, who, of course, drew with Nathaniel Collins in a fight that Collins was probably winning, then maybe sort of took his eye off the ball. They're going to fight again. So the vacant European title, Liam Davies having his second fight up at featherweight there. And Willie Hutchinson against Ezra Taylor. Ezra Taylor's kind of talked himself into that fight, hasn't he? I remember a few months back, Willie Hutchinson was interviewed ringside about Ezra Taylor, and he was just like, who's he? Who is this guy? Well, now they're in against each other, and I'm going to be intrigued to see how that one plays out.
That's my favourite matchup on the card, to be honest, is Willie Hutchinson against Ezra Taylor. It's good to see Liam Davies back at European title level. I'd fancy him to win that one. But yeah, Hutchinson against Ezra Taylor. Ezra Taylor's last fight, of course, was when he beat Steed Woodall in 9 rounds, I think about 6 months ago, something like that. Unbeaten. Willie Hutchinson has tasted defeat. I think Willie Hutchinson will be too classy for Ezra Taylor ultimately. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him drawn into a bit of a dogfight for certain periods of this contest. And that, for me, is the one that I'm looking forward to the most. Also, like Shaquille Thompson and Brad Pauls, as we've briefly touched upon already. Michael Gomez Jr. is back against Jordan Flynn. It's, as domestic cards go, it's excellent. There's a lot of solid fights there that you could kick back and really enjoy. And they will keep on coming. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's at least one surprise amongst those.
And maybe sign of the times, hopefully, for boxing fans that, Frank, Eddie are going to have to get knuckle down and get these shows on.
They will, 100%. And you mentioned it earlier, said I don't think we're going to see another Frank v Eddie, and I don't necessarily think that we will do that. But having spoken to both sides behind the scenes, not necessarily the head honchos of those particular promotional groups, but having been speaking to various people within Matchroom and Queensberry, I think they will be very open to working together. I think they do feel a little bit like that they've got to prove something, and ultimately, if working together means proving how strong they are individually, then I think they'll do that.
Yeah, I do as well. I just meant with those particular names at middleweight, because it doesn't make sense for some of those names to be sort of carving up your own career business plan just to make business. So I just with those particular, but I think as a general rule, I think you're absolutely bang on. I think they have to. I think out of necessity, they need each other now, out of necessity. So I think that's good news for us as boxing fans. What about Fundora Thurman? Stateside, he's 6'5", Fundora, 80-inch reach. What the hell is he doing in a boxing ring? He's like Mr. Tickle, isn't he? He's absolutely unbelievable, Fundora. Up against the sort of Keith Thurman, who's returned, last March? He's been out for another year, Thurman, having been out for 3 years. And he looked pretty good against the Aussie, didn't he, down under? He looked pretty good, but that was a fight at a certain level. Obviously, his first up at 154 pounds, and he's been out of the ring again. This one, of course, delayed, supposed to be fought previously. So what are you thinking about this one? Fundora is the bookie's favourite, quite sizable too. You can back Thurman at nearly 3-1 against.
Fundora should be the big favourite. He should be. Thurman is here on name value alone. Not saying he can't surprise us. Not saying he hasn't got one more trick up his sleeve. But Fundora is the man, very much in form, and Thurman is here because we still remember how excited we were about him 10 years ago. I sat on a media call with both of them, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, and their contrasting personalities was really interesting. You're sitting through, again, no offense to anybody, but you're kind of sitting through questions being asked to Fundora, and you're thinking, I'm not even going to get a single line out of this. He reminded me, even though he doesn't look anything like him, but he reminded me of a young Daniel Dubois, just that kind of where you can't really get them to go off script. They're going to win the fight, and they've trained really hard, and this guy can't beat me. Yeah, no, well, because I've trained really hard, and I know what he brings, and I'm going to beat him. And then you get Thurman on, and goodness me, the charisma all of a sudden. And he was convincing, Keith Thurman, exceptionally convincing that he was going to win the fight. And with victory, he will then be able to go into the Hall of Fame. But I think realistically, if you have to go back several years for a fighter's last victory at world class, then generally that fighter will not prevail against an active world-class fighter. And I think Fundora, even for a peak Keith Thurman, would have been a very difficult proposition. And I think that will prove the case. Do you know what? I'm really looking forward to it. There's something about this fight that really intrigues me. I really want to watch it. However, the price tag in America to watch it, $75. And again, people wonder why boxing isn't drawing in the millions and millions, and people don't know that it's happening. This is supposedly a massive fight. It's the only way they could get away with attaching a $75 price tag to it if it wasn't a massive fight and it wasn't an intriguing fight. But that isn't going to make people watch. It's not going to help the visibility of the sport in the big wide world. But anyway, we've been down that road before. But for me personally, I will be watching, and not necessarily live though. But I am really looking forward to this one.
I am as well, because of all the questions, because of the doubts, and because of the stylistic matchup. You know, the freakery of Fundora, size-wise, the dimensions of him, but also stylistically. I'm pretty sure you're going to see from Thurman what you saw attempted by Derrick Gainer against Diego Corrales in 2000. You're going to see back foot movement, feet, back foot movement, feet, and then just explode with a right hand or when you get an opportunity. That's what you're going to see from Thurman, I think, is and he's got really good feet, Thurman. Still, when we saw him belatedly in advancing years, slightly balding, a weight division up, it's a different Thurman in many ways, but he's still got really good feet. And I think you have to say that 2 defeats of Tszyu doesn't make Fundora a monster. Not by a long, long, long stretch. You got to be honest about that. Fundora's a good, solid fighter, and he can punch, but beating Tszyu twice doesn't make him unbeatable here. Not by a long shot.
No. And that's why it is intriguing. You give Thurman a shot, but there's reasons why he's been out the ring. He is long in the tooth. You mentioned his hairline there. I love it. I love his hairline, and I hope
you do.
I hope he continues to wear that hairline with the pride that he has been in the build-up. I hope that doesn't disappear, because he is so at ease with it. It seems that he's so at ease with it, and I love that.
Amen. Do you know, every time I see Pep Guardiola on telly, I think, I just want to shave my head off. I just want to be done with that. I just want to shave it all off. And my wife is she's so adamantly against it. And I normally carve my own path, but when we've got to live together day in, day out, I've probably got to have some sensitivity towards her desires in that regard. So, but I really I'd quite like to do it. I'd like to just shave it all off and just embrace that look, the old Pep Guardiola. I'd be all in for it. I think Thurman needs to Thurman needs to get the old number one out, doesn't he, or the razor out?
Well, this is what this is. Look, let's not turn this into
Today on Hair Watch.
On a Hair Watch podcast, but I do when this is my opinion on it. When I see people and I see men down the pub, in the supermarket, just going about their business, and they have spent hours trying to get the best of what they've got left, and they've got comb overs or anything, I just think I can empathise with the misery that they will have felt while they were looking in the mirror, trying to just create something from nothing, and ultimately still creating nothing from nothing. On those occasions, get rid of it. But with Keith Thurman, much like old Terry Nutkins, he used to love being bald and having long hair down the sides. Whatever you're happy with, if you're at ease with it, you go for it. But don't torture yourself by trying to make something that isn't there anymore. But Keith Thurman's in a different mindset. He's loving it.
Will he love becoming a two-weight world titleist at the weekend? Well, we shall see. It's probably a bit like Adam is against Ammo, isn't it, Matt? That we think Thurman's got a right chance, but sense that Fundora's just got to win.
Yeah, I do, and I think it might go the full 12. Fundora's shown frailties. This is something else to remember. Fundora's shown frailties in the past that don't just disappear. They won't just go away. They just haven't been exposed for a while. So that doesn't mean that Thurman doesn't have a real chance here. But yes, I think it will be rather lopsided win for Sebastian Fundora on the cards.
I think if Thurman's to win, he's going to have to hurt him and knock him out, I think.
Yeah.
Because there'll be lots of little cameos from Thurman off the back foot, but I'm not sure those little cameos will add up to enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Unless he can put Fundora down or hurt him. I just don't think incrementally that'll add up enough on the cards for him to win the fight. But we'll see. That's coming up this weekend. Before we move on to this week, just to say massive thanks to the Patreons, you lovely people. Thanks to you for that. Less than $5 a month. You're allowing the podcast to come to you week to week. And also to NAS Medical, our sponsors as well. They sponsor the pod. NAS Medical, who specialise in complete medical coverage for boxing events. And that includes Fight Night, ringside medical care, ringside medicine training courses, and also expert second opinions on all aspects of boxing-related medical matters. Boxer safety is their priority. You can find them on Instagram at NAS Medical Limited or online, nasmedical.co.uk. Go and check out them and all that they do, and maybe they can help you in one way or another as we count down to this week. And this week, we take you back to the 18th of March, 2000 at the MGM. Not a particularly bouncy or lively or well-attended MGM on this occasion, which is interesting. We'll come to that because nominally Floyd Mayweather was topping the bill. Floyd Mayweather and Diego Corrales been squeezed together, and they would ultimately fight in a year's time. But on this occasion, it was Derrick Gainer in the other corner. Roy Jones Jr. mentored Derrick Gainer from the same Pensacola, Florida area as Corrales defended his super featherweight title, the IBF version, for the second time. Gainer, Matt, a perennial sort of contender.
It's like you've just leant over into my office and read the first two words under Derrick Gainer. Got here Derrick Gainer, 33-4, perennial contender. Yeah, it's exactly what he was.
This isn't just put together. This podcast, you know, it's not just ramshackle put together.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. Yeah, next. No, he was a really good fighter, Derrick Gainer. There was talk for a long time about him and Hamed he was one of the guys around this sort of time that Hamed fought most of them, but he didn't fight Derrick Gainer. Had some really good wins on his record going into this fight. Manuel Medina had split 2 with Kevin Kelly. Still had the best period of his career to come, I think. But people were just looking at these two guys, 6 foot or whatever they were, fighting down at super featherweight, saying, how is this possible? And for the first round or so, it was really evenly contested, I thought.
Well, the first 2 rounds, there's not much happens, to be honest. I mean, we've not chosen a barn burner. Ultimately, we get a very convincing win in the third for Diego Corrales. But yeah, you see what Gainer's trying to do. Box, move, back foot. They're hammering that home in the corner in between the first and second rounds. Don't get involved. And that's what it's like for the first 2 rounds. We're short on action. I think there's no doubt that Corrales had prepared. He sparred actually Kevin Kelly, who'd fought Gainer on 2 occasions, hadn't he, Matt, previously? And Gainer had boxed really, really well against Kevin Kelly and was winning plenty of rounds until he got clocked in one of those fights. But Corrales had sparred Kevin Kelly. He'd actually stopped 7 knockouts. Stopped all 7 of the southpaws he'd faced prior to matching up with Gainer in this one as well. But first 2 rounds, not much going. And then for some reason, Gainer decides to fight in the pocket with Diego Corrales, despite everything that his corner are telling him and have been telling him through the first 2 rounds. And then in the third round, they just bang heads and fight in the pocket. Only ever going to be one winner in that fight, mate. Only one winner.
You fight like that against Diego Corrales, particularly this 22-year-old Diego Corrales, and it ain't going to work. It's not going to end nicely for you, and it didn't for Derrick Gainer. All very suddenly comes to an end in the third round. And it seems clear earlier on in the round when Gainer is more gung-ho and he's more aggressive. And you mentioned Roy Jones, and Gainer and Roy Jones were the closest of friends, gym mates. Roy Jones is there at ringside. And you just wonder, even though Roy Jones had been at his fights before, this would have been Gainer's biggest fight to this point. And you just wonder if Gainer was trying too hard to impress his mate, because let's not forget where Roy Jones was at that particular point in 2000, probably at his peak, probably at his all-conquering best, regarded as the best fighter in the sport. And Gainer just almost suddenly tried to do a Roy Jones on Diego Corrales. Unfortunately, Diego Corrales did a Diego Corrales on Derrick Gainer. First knockdown, fairly heavy. I thought the second one was I think Gainer's reaction to being dropped that second time, where he kind of looked up, does the kind of false bravado smile, looks at Roy Jones at ringside, I noticed, then tries to get up and stumbles ever so slightly. I think that is what is playing on the referee's mind, more so than what Gainer is saying when he eventually gets up.
Yeah, there's 3 little, you wouldn't call them stumbles or falls, but there's 3 successive mini lilts, is what I would call them. There's just little tilts or lilts forward where he's clearly feeling the effects of that second knockdown, or maybe still feeling the effects of the first left hook knockdown. No surprise, it's the left hook. It's one of the big telling punches from Corrales. But yeah, when he's down the second time, he looks bright-eyed, and he does get up, and he absolutely has his wits about him. But I think it's those 3 little lilts or tilts off balance while he's on his knee, Matt. I think that's what's played a part here, because otherwise it looks a bad stoppage, doesn't it?
It does, and I could understand from Gainer's point of view that he's furious that the fight has been stopped when he has said, I'm fine. And he said it twice, I'm fine. And he has walked towards the referee, he's put his hands out, he's done everything that a fighter should do to prove that they can continue. But just mere seconds before that, he was struggling to find his balance. He was struggling to get the leverage to get up because he couldn't get himself steady to get up when he wanted to get up. It's not the worst stoppage that we've ever seen, but there was a lot of, it was controversial at the time. But also, I think had it come in the 8th round and Gainer had, say, won 5 of the 7 leading into that 8th round, it would have been deemed exceptionally contentious. But the feeling was that even if the referee had allowed that to continue, that Corrales would have put the shots together relatively quickly and the fight would have ended anyway. But from Gainer's point of view, biggest fight of his life to that point, Roy Jones alongside him, yeah, I can completely understand his annoyance at the end. Wasn't convinced by his explanation, however, when he says in the post-fight interview that I went down the second time just to get out the way of the punches. It seemed to me that he was punched to the canvas.
His corner were mad. Commentary team, Jim Lampley, why has he stopped it? And he talks of the safety-first approach in Las Vegas. Was that just prevalent at the turn of the millennium, Matt? Was that a thing?
I'm not sure. It sounds like it was. It sounds like it must have been. But yeah, I can completely understand it from the fighter's point of view and from the commentator's point of view. And I can't recall when I watched this fight, but when I saw it for the first time, I thought it was premature, particularly given how clear-eyed Gainer is and how he's saying he's fine. And he's doing everything that the referee's asking of him. And from HBO's point of view, they're building this up into, this is a really good fight between 2 talented fighters and it's all over all of a sudden in round 3. And if that finish is not completely satisfactory, then people are going to be a little bit frustrated by it. But watching it back today and given everything that you know about the sport, it's most certainly not going to make it onto my 100 worst stoppages in history list.
Jane Adey, of course, he was the man in the middle for the Zab Judah reaction against Costas Yu, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
When Judah gets knocked down, talking to the referee while he's been knocked down and effectively been knocked out. He's sort of pointing and talking at the referee while he's going towards the canvas, and then goes mental and starts throwing a stool at him because he gets stopped. I mean, one of the most bizarre, we've dealt with that in This Week before, that Judah knockout by Costas Yu, that slicing, slamming right hand, just chops right down against his jaw as if he's just painting a brushstroke violently and beautifully. Wow, that is one of the most iconic moments in boxing, I think. That whole series of events is still one of the most iconic memories for me in the sport of boxing. It was Jane Adey who was the ref on that night and on this night as well. A night when Floyd Mayweather and Diego Corrales were on the same bill by design. Mayweather would move to 23-0 with a points decision, a distance win, and he'd defend his WBC title for the 5th time. So Corrales and Mayweather would meet in about a year's time. But there's an interesting interaction between Jim Lampley and Larry Merchant. There isn't much of a crowd, says Larry Merchant. Why, Jim Lampley? Well, maybe Floyd Mayweather at this point, he's not at the point yet where people feel like they have to see him, is the interaction there. Sparse crowd with not much to get into, but they would have something to cheer about as the Mayweather story grew. And of course, he'd gain his own sort of promotional independence further down the line. But Corrales, he'd roll over a couple of opponents, Justin Duco and Angel Manfredi. That's a fight we talked about in This Week before. In his next 2, before he'd lose in 10 to Floyd on a night when Floyd sparkled in 2001.
Yeah, I mean, depending which Floyd you preferred. whether it was the early career Floyd or the late career Floyd, I think you can make a case to say that he was never as perfect as he was on that night against Diego Corrales. And they were building it, but it's easy now to now we know all we do about Floyd Mayweather, and we kind of witnessed his career and the aftermath and everything else, and to just presume that Floyd Mayweather was always box office and that he could just click his fingers and thousands would want to come and see him fight. That wasn't the case throughout his career. But it's interesting. I went back and I looked at the artwork, the posters for this particular event. And on the left-hand side, you have Mayweather. And then it's Mayweather, and then really small, it's versus Vargas. And then on the right-hand side, there's a picture of Corrales. So you just, the two surnames you see are Mayweather, Corrales. You see the two faces together. That is what they were building for. And that was the selling point of this event.
Really clever. Yeah, really interesting promotion. So a year away from that fight, 5 years away from the two Castillo fights, Diego Corrales and Castillo famously, and 7 years away from Corrales ending both his career, and then shortly after that, his life in an accident as well. April 2007, Corrales ended his boxing career. It was the next month, May, when he died in a motorbike accident at the age of 29. Matt, unbelievably.
It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable. And you kind of just hearing his soft voice in the post-fight interview, you think, wow, nobody would have. And you see Bob Arum next to him. Bob Arum goes on, still going in his 90s, and poor old Diego taken before he even reached 30. It's things like that as you do get older. I don't want to get too philosophical, but you do start to think about how much you need to appreciate the time that you've got.
Oh, this is it. Whatever your religious beliefs, etc., there's a good chance this is it. So don't waste it. Don't poodle around. Don't get peeved or angry about things that really, in the greater scheme of things, don't matter. Just don't matter. Live it, love it, get on with it, push. And join us again next week for the opening bell, and tell your mates. Subscribe to the Patreon if you've got less than $5 a month, if you can afford it. If not, tune in next week and we'll take you along for the ride. Bye for now.